Right. Good evening. Thank you for joining me. Okay. So, what we want to try and do this evening, hopefully, is move on from where we were last week. We will summarize a little bit, but I'm afraid I'm going to introduce some new complexities, some new challenges to remind ourselves. We've been looking at the apparently the different motivations, as it were, within creation, why Hashem created. And this is what we started looking at. We've done a few sessions on this already, but we're going to continue this journey today because there is more work to be done. So no further ado. This week, we will delve a little into the world of the Ramban. And what we're going to try and demonstrate is that the Ramban himself would appear to contradict himself. Okay, so let's get started. This first quote is from arguably the most famous Ramban of all, arguably. And that is the very famous Ramban at the end of Parshas Bo, where the Ramban delineates to us very clearly the purpose of creation. He couldn't be clearer. So I'll take you through this text. I'll quickly read and translate it. And then I will demonstrate that the Ramban himself elsewhere seems to say something that flatly contradicts this, and we'll try and draw the threads together. Very much like we did last week, but there's more complexity. The kavonas kol ha-mitzvot, says the Ramban, the purpose of all mitzvahs, shena'amin be'elokeinu, that we should believe in Hashem, v'noida elov shehu bara'anu, and we should thank him, acknowledge and thank him that he created us. Vehi kavonas hayetzira. And this is the purpose in creation itself. The Ramban could not be clearer. There is no room for ambiguity here. Vehi, it, singular, kavonas hayetzira. This is the point and the purpose of creation. And in case it wasn't clear enough, he then elaborates very beautifully. She'ein lonu tam acher b'yetzira harishona. There is no other reason in creation itself. Ve'ein el elyon chofetz b'tachtonim. Nor does Hashem have any desire at all from any lower creatures, as it were, milvad, other than sheyeda ha'odom v'yoide le'loikov shebara'oi. Other than man should know, acknowledge, and thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who created him. The end. That's it. It's very clear. Couldn't be clearer. That's the Ramban. That is the purpose of creation. That we should acknowledge and thank him for creating us. That's it. The purpose of lifting up our voices in prayer. The kavonas botek nisios, and the purpose of having shuls, uzchus tfilas harabim, and the merit, the purpose of having public prayer, zehu sheyihyeh livnei odom mokim, we should have a space, v'yiskabtzu v'yoidu le'el shebara'am, that we should get together, and it seems it has more value and more quality when this acknowledgement and thanks, if you like, for creating us is done in a public forum. V'himtziam, he brought us into existence. V'yefarsamu zeh, we should broadcast this. V'yoimru lefanecha, here is a fridge magnet if there ever was one. V'yoimru lefanav, and we should say in front of him two words: B'riyosecha anachnu, we are your creatures. You boirei, me nivra. Simple as that. That is the purpose of creation. The Ramban couldn't be clearer. I'm throwing in at the end of the page a Rashi and a Posuk in Yeshaya. Amzu yotzarti li tehilosi yisaperu, says Yeshaya Hanovi, and the reason I threw it in is because it seems to be saying exactly the same thing. This nation that I fashioned for myself, tehilosi yisaperu, says Yeshaya, they should sing my praises, says Rashi, lema'an tehilosi yisaperu. That is why I created them. So, before we go further, the Ramban could not be clearer. Purpose of creation is so that man should acknowledge and thank God, preferably in a public forum. It gives it more weight, more quality, and we turn around to him and we say 2 words. This is our motto. This is our mantra. Briosecha anachnu. We are your creatures. And that's the purpose of creation. Oh, yes? Really? Let's see. Not so simple. And I do apologize. This is a long piece. It's going to go over 3 slides, but I'll try and sort of zip through it as much as we can. But there's so many amazing concepts here. And I want to add something. We are not certainly this week even going to deal with the Rambam. You may have noticed, I'm surprised nobody's asked me, that we have dealt with, the Zohar, and we've done the Ramchal, and we've done a number of different, we haven't done the Rambam yet, and the Rambam's complex. He writes a couple of things in Moreh Nevuchim, a couple of things in other Sfarim, but here, the Ramban in this context, let me set the scene. This is the slightly enigmatic mitzvah of Shiluach Hakein, sending away the mother bird, about which the Gemara, the Mishnah says, this is not anybody who says, oh, Hashem has pity, as it were, on the bird, we tell him, be quiet. Now, the question is, what does this mean? So the Rambam says something, which I'm not going to go into, and these comments of the Ramban are in response to the Rambam. Okay, I've just set the scene. That's the context. Avol, follow with me. Avol elu hahagodois asher niskashu al horav. But these Gemaras, which the Rambam really struggled with, kafi dati inyan achir lohem, says the Ramban, I see them very differently. Sherotzu loymar, all they mean to say is, she'ein hatoy eles b'mitzvos lahakodesh baruch hu ba'atzmo yisale. Hashem himself can derive no benefit from mitzvos. He is perfect. He's a perfect being. He cannot receive anything. Aval hatoy eles ba'odom atzmoi. The purpose of mitzvahs is for man, is to perfect man. And he goes into and the reason this quotation is going to be quite long is because it's important for us to realize and see how clear it is. The purpose is either, he sketches out a few options. Number 1, the purpose of mitzvahs could be corrective in nature, to correct a negative or a bad inclination, or to preventative, to prevent an incorrect approach. That's one possibility. Here is another category that mitzvahs could do. Or they may have a positive connotation, to remember, to remind us of amazing things Hashem did for us. Furthermore, and you could argue whether this is a second or a third one, I'm not fussed, v'lo das es Hashem, and potentially in so doing, acknowledge and acquaint oneself and get some sort of understanding of knowing Hashem, whatever that means. V'zehu, and this is why it says that the mitzvahs were given, litzaref bohem es habrios. That is the Gemara that the Rambam was talking about, litzaref. Now that word litzaref means to smelt. Ich weiß nicht, wie man sagt das auf Deutsch. But the idea is that when you take various metals and you smelt them, you put them down together, you melt them down, and in so doing, create a connection. You purify. Sheyihiyu kekesef tzoruf. It is to elevate, to remove impurities. Ki hatzoref hakesef ein masei b'lo tam. The reason that somebody would smelt down silver is not because they're bored on a rainy Sunday afternoon. It is to filter out impurities. Similarly, that is the one possibility of mitzvahs, to remove any bad ideas, to remind us of what is true, and to as a constant reminder. Therefore, says the Ramban, it is clear over here. What they're saying over here is that the purpose of mitzvahs is not for Hashem, such as he would need light or something like that. It looks as if Hashem needs the sweet smelling ketores, or he doesn't need any of that. Even remembering the nisim he did for us. He gets nothing out of it. That we should know, this is all about us. The purpose of creation, the purpose of the mitzvah is for us. V'nizkeboy. Then we become worthy of his protection. Whatever we say to him, about him, do, it's irrelevant. His kiruki hamitzvos hamasiyos kegen shmitas shchitas hatzavar. Hashem says, shecht from this part, not from that part. What's the point? Lelamdeinu hamidos hatovos v'hamitzvos hagzeros hagduros b'minon lezakekes nafshosenu. This is all about us. It's for us, to elevate us, to filter out impurities and to elevate us. Etc. Imkein kulam l'toyalosenu bilvad. They are all for us. That's very simple. Go on. And he goes on and he says in Ibeira, halulav, vasukah, vatfilin, all of these things, this is not for Hashem's glory. This is to have pity on us, to give us opportunities to better ourselves. And this is what we say in Yom Kippurim, in the Ela actually, etc., etc. The kavan in all of these, I'm coming just to the end of the quote here. This is the end of the long quote. It's all for us and not for him. Everything is for us. The purpose of creation is for us, to elevate us. Now, if we stop here for a second, potentially we have a little bit of a contradiction. It is possible to wriggle out of it. It's not the end of the world, this particular contradiction within the Ramban, because let's recap. What did we see in the opening slide this evening? The Ramban at the end of Boy, where he says the tachlis of creation is to acknowledge and to thank him. And here he has said very emphatically, the purpose of mitzvahs is to elevate us. One could wriggle out of that and distinguish between creation itself and the purpose of mitzvahs. And there may be some validity to that. And certainly what is going to work is what we said last week in the name of the Vilna Gaon, and I'll say it again now, maybe for the benefit of those that weren't here last time, and this is really important. Do not confuse motivation with mechanism. I'll say that again. We must not confuse motivation of creation with the mechanism, the operating system of creation. And we said last week, the Vilna Gaon, Toiv Yotzar Kavoid Lishmoi. If you recall, beautiful thought from the Vilna Gaon. Maybe we'll look at it again shortly. The reason for creation is Toiv. Hashem is good. That is the reason, the motivation. There can be no other motivation. The mechanism by which we achieve our perfection is via something which he specifically created for the purpose. You know, lahavdil, it's like, I remember seeing many, many years ago a fascinating interview with Steve Jobs when some geek took him to task for ditching, I think it was OpenDoc or something, in favor of another operating system or whatever. And it was really interesting because he attacked him in public. And I learned a few things from that video. Number one, I learned actually a little bit of humility, because he was already a multi-billionaire, incredibly successful. And this fellow was was on some sort of, I don't know, a rant about a particular piece of software. In other words, he'd fallen in love with a particular type of software. And Steve Jobs turned around and said, you know what? He said, you might be right, he said. Maybe OpenDoc would be better than the Apple iOS or whatever. But my engineers try and look at things from the perspective of the consumer experience. Somebody who doesn't know anything about OpenDoc or this or that, they pick up a device, and they were going to have an interface with this device, and they want to have a smooth, user-friendly experience. And we try and look at it from their perspective. And that was quite an awesome thing at many different levels. So the Rabbeinu Shalom, why does he create? Why did he create? He created in order to give. But what is the mechanism? What is the operating system, the software, which is the operating principle of all of existence? This is where other ideas come into play. So kavod lishmoi, for example, toiv, because Hashem is toiv, yotzar, therefore he created something through which we would achieve access to toiv, which is himself. Of that in future shiurim. But the way and the only way to achieve it is shehakol bara lichvoidai. Okay, that is the basic idea of the Vilna Gaon. But we're not over by any means. I want to confuse you further. There are two very beautiful quotes which I want to share with you. They are worth knowing. They are astounding in and of themselves. They are from Reb Chaim Volozhiner, and then much later, Second World War, Reb Chaim Ozer Grudzinski, Zichronim Livracha. I'll read and translate. The first one comes from the Hakdama, the introduction to the Reb Chaim Volozhiner's classic sefer, the Nefesh HaChaim. Eidusoi shel Reb Itzela miVolozhin al Oviv Hagrach. Reb Itzela miVolozhin testifies about his father, Reb Chaim Volozhiner. This is in the introduction to the Nefesh HaChaim. V'koi hoya dvoroi Eli Tomid, says Reb Itzela about his father, Reb Chaim Volozhiner. This is what he would constantly say to me. Shezeh kol ha'odam. This is the entire purpose of man. Loila atzmai nivra is not created for himself. Rak lahoyil la'acharini, but to benefit others. K'choil asher yimotzei b'koichei la'asos. Whatever he or she can do to support, to benefit others, that is tachlis habriya. That is the purpose of the creation of man. To be beneficent towards others. That's quote number one, and it's an incredible quote in and of itself. The second quote is from hundreds of years later, but sort of circa Second World War, Reb Chaim Ozer Grudzinski, the very famous chief rabbi of Vilna, who oversaw, he's a genius amongst geniuses, and yet he was somebody that oversaw all the relief effort in Europe with all the craziness that was going on. And he writes as follows: Lefonim bimei alumai, he says, in my youth, hayisi savor, I used to think sheha ikar eitzel ha'adam kamoini, that the main thing for somebody like me, meaning somebody who is blessed with an incredible intellect, to innovate in Torah and to compose svarim. However, now it is clear to me, chibur svarim, that to compose svarim, kimesachek b'sha'ashuim, is like playing with toys. It is a luxury. Le'umas hatzoyrech litmoich ba'almonos yesoimim aniyim v'talmidei chachomim. When it is put against the need to support the disadvantaged, the disempowered, the widows, orphans, the poor, and talmidei chachomim. And this is a statement from somebody who was a genius, as I say, somebody who spent his life paskening. He was the posek of the Dor, without a shadow of a doubt. And yet, he says, as he got older, he realized that the luxury of innovating in Torah, for which he was blessed, he had that capacity, but that is not the tachlis. So here, we have two incredible, beautiful quotes in and of themselves, where they would appear to indicate here we have another motive. I'm going to sum them up in a chart a little bit later. So here's another one, and that is purpose of creation is to help others. Okay, let's keep moving. And here we have a quote from the Vilna Gaon, and this is a little bit intricate, but bear with me, and let's see, time permitting, what we might manage to do with this. It's something that's quite dear to me in the sense that we're coming up to Purim, so I can't really help myself. I think we have to mention it. There is a big theme in Purim, if you notice, There is a theme in Purim which has to do with dignity, glory, kingdom, kingship, and specifically crowns. The corona aspect will not be lost on you. I'll explain to you what it means by this. I'll give you a very quick introduction because I have a lot of Torah on this, but it's a little bit of a sidebar, but it is important. And that is, the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara in Megillah says, when it discusses one of the discussions about a posuk to frame the whole Megillah, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok says as follows. He says, Lule Hashem Shir Hamalos, Lule Hashem Shahoya Lanu Yemana Yisrael, Lule Hashem Shahoya Lanu Bekum Aleinu Adam. If were it not for the fact that Hashem stood up for us, Bekum Aleinu Adam, when a man stood up against us. And says Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok, that's a posuk in Tehillim. David HaMelech says that. Says Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok, Adam v'loy melech. What is going on over here in the Purim story? The Maharal explains, despite the fact that this takes place within one of the 4 classic stages of Golus, which is Modai Uporas, but it is not to be ascribed, it is not to be understood within the context of a classic Golus story, because Golus is connected to an empire, a dynasty, a Malchus. You have the Malchus of Bovel, of Edom, of Poras, of Yovon. So the Chanukah, unlike the Chanukah story, which is to be seen against the backdrop of an empire, a value system, a thought system, which is called Yovon. This one, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok explains in the name of David HaMelech. What does David HaMelech mean when he says, if Hashem was not for us, Bekum Aleinu Adam, Adam v'loy melech. This is about Adam. This is, would the real Adam stand up? And the real Adam did stand up. Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachave. He stood up straight and tall. The only time Hanuman stood straight was when he was hanged. And it's not a coincidence, because to be an Adam, this is what the battle was about. Who is the Adam? Go right back to the beginning of creation. And Haman already rears his ugly head. Hamin ha'etz hazeh, Haman, hamin ha'etz. And he is claiming title to what it means to be an Adam. And Mordechai disputes that. And I'll stop there for the moment because it needs fleshing out a lot more. But the idea, and this is why is this relevant at this point, is because what does it mean to be an Adam? What does it mean to be an Adam? And it's we've mentioned this in previous shurim. To be an Adam is to be Yashar, is to be a noble, dignified, majestic creature that clearly is godly and represents Hashem. That's what it means. And that's why, by the way, the Gemara says in Megillah, Daf Daled Amud Aleph, how do we know that you are meant to read the Megillah? What is the scriptural reference, the proof that we should do? Says the Gemara, we learn it from the Pasuk, Lema'an yezamercha chovoid v'lo yidoim. Hashem Elokai lo ilam yedeka. Lema'an yezamercha chovoid. So that chovoid should sing to you. The reading of the Megillah is actually a shira. It is the nobility and the majesty and the dignity of Adam which Mordechai manifested. Our neshama is called kavod. David HaMelech says, Ura kavoidi. Wake up, my neshama. And the battle which is going on to this day, very much to this day, is the dignity and what it means to be an Adam. And if we are meant to be an Adam, and in so doing represents the Rabbeinu Shalom, then we can understand why Keser and Keser Malchus becomes relevant. Vashti is ordered to utilize the Keser Malchus in the most immoral and inappropriate way, just to have a Keser Malchus and nothing else. That is a denigration. It's the very opposite. and she loses her head. And Mordechai ultimately ends up having Haman putting the Ateres Zohov Gedola, the big golden corona, Ateres Zohov Gedola on his head, which Haman thought would be for him. This is all about, do we acknowledge and do we recognize first and foremost to ourselves that what it means to be an Adam is to be this dignified, majestic person. Let's now have a look at this Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon says something here quite fascinating. We'll try and sort of deconstruct it. It's the bit which I've shaded in. I'm sorry, I couldn't find a better text, but follow with me. In that first line, V'keser hu hatachlis, k'moi malchus, v'nikra keser malchus. We talk about keser, a crown of malchus. The crown is the tachlis, is the purpose, like malchus, and it is called keser malchus. Elo, says the Vilna Gaon, she malchus hu tachlis ha'peula, v'keser hu tachlis ha'poyel yizbarach. Malchus is the activity. Keser is, I'm going to translate it my way, is the motivation. And he's going to explain. V'hu ne'elam ma'od. The second bit, the keser, is hidden. What does this mean? Let me give you a little bit more insight into some of the more mystical terminologies. It's important for you to know this. So the concept of keser, of a crown when it comes to the Rabbeinu Shalom, is synonymous with Rotzon, with Hashem's will and desire. It is also called, in Kabbalistic terminology, ayin, nothing, because it is something that is by definition hidden. It's not something we can observe. The malchus, we can observe the effects, what we cannot observe, like you cannot see, as the Vilna Gaon is going to say in a minute. You can't see what's going on inside my world. You can see externalities, you can see activities, but the motivation, people can have all sorts of motivations. So the malchus is as actions manifest externally, and keser is the real inner world. Okay, so let's go on a little bit more. It's also keser is also that's probably enough said. I won't say anymore. Okay. We know, says the Vilna Gaon, that Hashem doesn't need anybody or anything. And the creatures do not add anything onto him at all. Therefore, keser is called Rotzain. Ki ein rak Rotzain levad. All there is a Rotzain. V'zehu hatachlis she'onu masigim. That is all that we can know, that there is a Rotzain. V'lozu bilvat elo afilu b'chol maaseh odom. Says the Vilna Gaon, this is true by the actions of human beings as well. Zehu inyan ne'elam. This is something that is hidden. B'ha'peula, in the activity. Ki ha'peula v'hatachlis shel ha'peula hu nigla. Let's say I decide to, and he's going to say in a minute, I think he gives an example, if I'm not mistaken, he gives an example. Let's say somebody builds a chair. Okay, so that would be the malchus. That's what I see, the externalities. I see somebody building a chair. Why is he building a chair? Does he love carpentry? Is he an employee? Is he doing it so that people will say, oh, you're amazing? Is he trying to sell it? Is it, oh, what's going on? That I know nothing about the keser, which is a reference to the inner world of motivation. Okay? Let's see if we need any more over here. And yes, he goes on to say what I just said, why he's doing it. Therefore, we talk about the last aspect of Hashem's interaction with the world. We always call the last of the spheres, we call Malchus. Okay. The truth is, everything is nothing for him, though. And here he says what I told you last week from him, and now just rush towards the end. In order to do good to us, he created this idea of kavod. He then goes on to Adnus and Havaya. Maybe we'll get back to that a little bit later on. Okay. The Arizal, as we mentioned last week, puts a number of these motivations together. When Hashem remember his Rotzain, Adon Olam, Hashem Molach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra. Let me just remind you, the master of the world, who was a Melech before he created anything, but le'es na'asa b'cheftzoi koil. But once his Rotzain was manifest, and we now have koil, then azai melech shmoi nikra, then and only then he is called a melech. And we'll come back to that. Says the Arizal, when the Rabbeinu Shalom decided to create the world, kedei lehetiv livruov, in order to do good, v'yakiru gedulosai, and they should acknowledge his greatness, and v'yizkulies merkava lamala, they should merit through their refinement to being a part of the Merkava, the platform, the chariot upon which Hashem's name, as it were, rests and is manifest. So he's put a few of them together. We saw the Gemara in Shabbos. I threw this in because we saw it last week as well. Hashem created the world only so that people should fear him. So we have another motivation. And now we will try and bring it all together. Okay, let's try and do this. So I have been able to identify, I think there are more, but this is all I had time for. So in the Ramban, we saw what possibly and potentially might be considered two different motivations. Number one, the Ramban in Boy, to acknowledge and to thank. Briyosecha anachnu, lahakir ulahoidos, to acknowledge and to thank. That's the first one. And then he says, by Shiluach HaKain, what does he say? Everything is all to benefit us. We have the Ramchal et al. With many others who say, I didn't want to put every single source, Reb Sadigon and many, many others, that Hashem, the purpose of creation was for Hashem to give. We have the Zohar we mentioned last week, Lishta Moidele, to acquaint ourselves with and to get some sort of understanding of Hashem. We have Reb Chaim Volozhner who says, so that humans should help others. We have the Gemara that says to fear him. And probably most notably of all, Kol Masha Bara Kodesh Baruch Hu, he only did it lichvoidoi, Kol Pal Hashem lemaneu, for his own glory. How are we going to square this particular circle? So let's try. We did a little bit of it last week. Let's do a little bit more. Not to confuse, and this is the key idea. Do not confuse motivation with mechanism. Motivation, everybody agrees. And it has to be thus. The motivation is to give. Perfect being, it has to be to give. Now what we need to do is try and, in as much as is possible, see how these various strands are emphasizing different aspects of the mechanism that will turn us into worthy recipients of being able to receive that goodness. Okay? Let me reintroduce the idea that I mentioned last week in the following way, an idea from Rav Moshe Shapiro Zechon Levracha. 3 malachim come to visit Avraham Avinu. One of them will leave aside, the one which comes to heal him. The other 2, and there is a thread, although they each had different specific tasks, but there is a thread between them. Tonight we will talk about the connection between 2 of them. One of them was to give the news that Avram would have a son, Yitzchak, and the other one was to destroy Sodom. What's the conflation? What's the connection between the 2? Let's stop and think about this for a second. Din is not judgment. Din is emes. Din is ma shenachon, a consequence of, it's a reality. Din is emes. And in that sense, it's not something bad. It just is. It's just what things are. That's what din is. And Sodom In one sense, they said, well, if you don't have something, sheli, sheli, shelcha, shelcha. Let's take that aspect of it. Says the Mishnah, that which is mine, that which is yours is yours. This is midas sodom. Well, what's wrong with that? What is mine, and what is yours. That sounds perfectly rational and reasonable to me. Why is that so terrible? It is because they failed to realize that din, and indeed everything, is only an outgrowth and a consequence of chesed. Let's explain this. If you want to do kindness to somebody, what is the best form of tzedakah that you can give? We know, as the Rambam says, give a man a job. Don't give him charity. Give him a job. When he has a job, he earns and deserves and can demand, and from a din perspective, he becomes the master of his own destiny. But why did I do that? I didn't have to give him a job. It was chesed to give him the job. Chesed is the forerunner. It is the makoyer. It is the shoresh. It is the root of din. You cannot isolate din without acknowledging its roots in chesed. That is what din is. Din is important. Ki chol derech of mishpat. Hatzur tomim parloi, ki chol derech of mishpat, says the pasuk. All of his ways are judgment. I once noted that in Shemona Esra, there is only one, well, there are two brachas where in the closing part of the bracha, we acknowledge and we sort of attribute a motivation, so to speak, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, rather than just saying he does X, he does Y. He is Goyel Yisrael, he's Roifei Chayle, he's Beinei Yerushalayim. Okay, so now the first one is Roitze b'Tshuva. He wants Tshuva. But there is something he absolutely, utterly loves. He is Oihev Tzedakah u'Mishpat. He just loves what is. Tzedakah does not mean charity, you know that. If you're attending this shir, you know that tzedakah does not mean charity. Tzedakah means tzedek, what is correct and appropriate. He loves mishpat because mishpat is consequence. It is what is. Hashem says about Avram Avinu, Ki yedativ, I love him. I wish to have a meaningful relationship with him, which is why I'm going to reveal to him that what I'm going to do to Sodom. Ki yedativ, why? Lemana she yitzaves bonav es beis ha'achrov, because he will initiate a legacy. Now, if you've never seen this pasuk before, I'll tell you how I would have entered this pasuk. Because I love him, because I know him, I want to have a relationship with him, because he is going to do the opposite of what Sodom does. Avraham Avinu is the Amud HaChesed. That's what I would have written. Torah doesn't say that. Ki yedativ, says Hashem, lemana sheyitzava esbonav esbeis ha'achrov, because he will institute a legacy of lasos tzedakah u'mishpat. This is Avraham Avinu. But only an Avraham Avinu can be the father of mishpat. And this, says Reb Moshe, genius. This is what's going on. Sodom, in and of itself, the notion of having a system of what is ownership, of what is right, of what belongs to who and what doesn't belong to who, which is din, which is just stating that which is, in and of itself is not a bad thing, it's emes. But to divorce it and to disassociate it from its roots, that is to deny an understanding of where din comes from, where it is motivated. Din is meaningful because it justifies. It's an opportunity to be, to earn. And therefore the Malach went to destroy Sodom, and the other Malach at the same time went to give the news. Do you know what the news was? Avraham hoilid es Yitzchak, the father of Yitzchak. Pachad Yitzchak. Din is who? None other than Chesed. Avraham hoilid es Yitzchak. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create the world because he wanted to give. The mechanism is din, to justify, to have bechira. So you operate autonomously in the moral sphere, so that the decisions that you make are real. They're important, and you are the architect of that. You have that. He gives you that opportunity, so that then, when you sit in Shamayim after 120 years, tzadikim yoshvim ve'itreisehem baroshehem. They've got their corona. They've got their crowns. They've earned it. They've deserved it. It's who they are. Who's the first one? Says the Gemara. Do you know why the Vilna Gaon said he loved this vort? We start Shacharis with Adoin Olam Hashem Olach. Why? Because who composed Shacharis? Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu, the Amud HaChesed. Says the Gemara, Lo hoya Adam shekaroi Odoin, the first person in the world to call HaKadosh Baruch Hu Odoin, master. What is Odoin? It's the same words and the same meaning as din, adnus, din. It had to be Avraham. Avraham, who gave, who lived and understood altruism, he realized that everything that existed is because Hashem wanted it to exist. And the greatest act of chesed is to stand on your own 2 feet and to give people an opportunity to stand on your own 2 feet. Yes, it's din, but what is the source? The source is chesed. And with this, we can, maybe one more little point, we can begin to sew sort of the threads together, so to speak. I want to add one thing, and I'll throw it in quickly. It's a bit more advanced, but we'll try. We'll go for it. And that is the 2 names that we use for the Rabbeinu Shalom, Yud Kei Vav Kei and Aleph Daled Nun Yud. One is written a certain way. Havaya Yud Kei Vav Kei means Hashem exists. He is existence, period. That's what he is. He just is. It's actually what it means. He is. He is existence itself. There are no ifs, there's no whys. You can't say why. He just is. In that sphere and that plane and that dimension of existence, which is Yichud Hashem, there is no room for anything else. That's the truth. But through a process, however Kabbalah explains, it doesn't matter, there becomes something else, which is a world where there is you and me and this table and other things, and there is then the opportunity to relate to him as a master. If there is only him, then there is no concept of adnus. And this is what I want you to appreciate. These 2 names actually move in opposite directions. Yud Kei Vav Kei says there is no other. He is existence. He is all of existence. In the dimension where Yud Kei Vav Kei is reigns supreme, for want of a better word, in Yichud Hashem, it negates, as we spoke about in previous shurim, it negates anything else existing. Yud Kei Vav Kei negates anything else existing. Adnus compels other things to exist. There is no concept of Aleph Daled Nun Yud if there is only Borei Olam. That's what needs to be appreciated. So we look with our eyes one way and we say something else for the moment. And this is really the difference, of course, between Shema and Baruch Shem. It's Yichud Elah, Yichud Tato. It's a bit more complicated. But once we understand this basic concept, it's not a basic concept, it's an important concept, it's an advanced concept, then all the other things fall into place. And that's why the Ramban, fascinatingly, I'll maybe just finish with this. You know, the Ramban, as we know, was the father of Kabbalah, in the sense that he is the one that was an incredibly important link in the chain of transmitting the Kabbalistic tradition. And therefore, fascinatingly, unlike, and this is almost a question, unlike the Ramchal and the Zohar and others that focus on Hashem giving and going to he does something else. He says to acknowledge and to thank, and to say we are your brios. I'm not sure you appreciate the delicacy of that question. But what he is saying is there are two levels. There is a lower level, which is called adnus, which means acknowledging there is an other. And in this world where there is us and there is Hashem and there are real choices to be made, then all the other ideas brought here are important. So let's go from the bottom to the top, for example. Lichvoidai, for his glory, this is the mechanism through which, when we recognize that, and to the extent that we recognize Shakol Bara Lichvoidai, to that extent we are able to manifest. We diminish ourselves. We don't diminish ourselves, but we acknowledge that we exist as instruments of using our brain to reveal and understand his presence. That is because he is Tov. Therefore, he created Kavod Lishmai. To fear him is the same thing, is to have that humility and to acknowledge we did not create ourselves. He created us. Reb Chaim Volozhiner does an amazing, beautiful thing. What does he say? He says the way that you achieve Shleimus is by imitatio Dei, by emulating the Rabbeinu Shalom. The only one motivation that we can reveal in everything that he does is to give. So therefore, the more that you can incorporate and inculcate giving into your essence, this is actually who we are. We just have to uncover it. And the more we connect to it, the more we are emulating the Rabbeinu Shalom and thus getting close to his Tov and deserving his Tov. And that's the same thing with the Zohar, and it's the same thing with the Ramchal and the Ramban. It is all basically the same idea. It is especially, I'll just finish with this, it is especially important in the run-up to Purim, because what Purim is about, unlike other Yomim Tovim, is about existence itself. Adam Arishon was told that on the day that you eat from on the day that you eat from the tree, you will die. On the day that you eat from it, you will die. And that means that on that day, he died. That means the Adam, and what it means to be an Adam from that moment on, was utterly diminished. He stopped being Yoshar, seeing things straight and clearly and acknowledging where everything comes from, and instead he listened to the least Yoshar animal on the planet, the most bendy and wavy, the snake. And then the game is on to try and recapture our status in recapturing, becoming an Adam again. We managed it briefly for a very short period of time at Matan Torah, but then, as we said today in the Shir Shel Yom, afterwards, Achein ka'adam temusan. Once again, you're going to die like an Adam. And then finally, as the Purim story unfolds, and this is about Adam v'lo Melech, it's not about a Malchus. It's about whether we are going to be able to deserve to be an Adam again. To be an Adam is to be Yoshar. Mordechai stands up Yoshar, doesn't bow. And we begin to recapture. We begin, and that's why when the Gemara says the reason that we read the Megillah is because we go mimisa l'chaim. Mimisa l'chaim, we go from death to life. It does not mean that there was a threat of death. That's not what it means. It says we go mimisa l'chaim. Until that point in time in history, we were, to some extent, we had not managed to recapture what it means to be Adam. And moving ahead, that's why it is Teshuasam Hayisa Lonetzach. Once we are an Adam, and we begin to live up to that, and then we began to manifest through Torah Sheba'al Peh, as it began to be revealed, which is really Malchus Peh, as it began to be revealed in Bayis Sheni, and we're on that trajectory until Bayomahu Hashem Echad U'Shmai Echad. That's why Purim will always stay with us. It gives us the key, hopefully, to getting back to being what it means to be an Adam, and what the Rebbeinu Shalom has done clearly in the last year. Purim killed many people last year. It was meant to be Mimisa L'chaim. There's no clearer message than that. And hopefully we learn the lesson and we get the Atorah Zav Gedola, the real Atorah, not the Corona, but the real Atorah, and we recapture what it means to be an Adam, which is to acknowledge, to thank, to benefit, to give out to others, to acknowledge him, to fear him, to realize that we are here to be a majestic creature. And with that, Mitzvah Hashem, we bring back the Chaim that we all hopefully need. Thank you so much for joining me. Be well, everybody. Kol Tov. Good night. Thanks. Bye.